So specifically, you've got experience being someone that has debated and disputed the impacts of global warming. My understanding of this, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that pre the fifth report, AR5, which was around 2012, the IPCC report said that there was an increase of extreme weather events correlated with climate change. Is that broadly true? And you had findings that showed that over the last 100 years, there's been no positive trend in hurricane frequency across the US. What was that,
Yeah,
what was that like?
Let me unpack that for you a little bit. So the work that I've done and continue to do has always been 100% what's called Working Group 1, the physical science group of the IPCC. It still is. There was a time when Working Group 2, which focuses on impacts, I would say, I don't know what the right analogy is. I'm in Colorado, so they got a little forward on their skis.
Right.
They were a little bit too aggressive. And I discovered when the fourth assessment came out that there had been a graph smuggled into the report that suggested that increasing disaster losses were being driven by increasing temperature around the world. It turns out that graph can be traced back. It was miscited to a report prepared for a workshop I organized. So I was immediately, aware that it shouldn't have been there.
Right.
The good news is the IPCC got back on track. It had a special report on extreme events, I think 2013. The fifth assessment report played it very straight on extremes. And the literature's gotten stronger. And one area of dissonance is that the media reporting and a lot of the discussion about climate change and extremes is diametrically opposed to what the IPCC says. And I think it's a lot easier for people to come after a professor in Colorado than to come after the IPCC. So, and that's fine. My peer-reviewed work on this topic has stood up really well over time. But it is really interesting seeing over time extreme weather kind of becoming the leading campaign tool for climate change, and that's out of step with what the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has concluded.
There's been a few examples of this where there's been sort of the poster child for the environmentalist movement that's been, I guess, opposite to what the actual data said. So there was sort of polar bears beforehand, and polar bear populations have increased, and then polar bears went away, and then it was wildfires, for example, and trends of wildfires are down. Do you feel it's unhelpful sometimes for the narrative to be opposite to the science?
Yeah, I think, both polar bears and forest fires, we could talk about them, are complicated, nuanced subjects.
Yeah.
And clearly climate has an impact on everything we do because we live in the climate system. So it's not surprising that there are long-term secular trends up or down in this or that phenomenon. The real challenge is the attribution question. And then after that, the policy impact question. So if you were to turn the dial down on CO2, tracing what that means for polar bears or fires or hurricanes is not straightforward. And I think in the political realm, it's always easier to have a simple, straightforward cause and effect message that's usually easy to understand, but often doesn't reflect the complexities of the real world. I get that, and that's how things work. I do think that if advocating for action on climate, and I am an advocate for action on climate, if we're going to justify that based on appeals to science, we play a really risky game if in making those appeals we're willing to overstep or mischaracterize what the large body of research actually says, because then we're risking our own credibility. So the case for action on climate is so strong that we don't need to misrepresent the science to make that case. So that's one of the frustrating things about the debate, is that it's not necessary to go there.
Yeah, so I had an experience last summer where I read into climate change and so on. I went through this process where it was an odd process because I read all these claims and so on and saw them sort of systemically taken apart by various scientists and commentators. And then you get, what if all of this is wrong, right? Not, and I consider myself, a liberal person, and, I sit in a similar position to you where I advocate action on climate. But I think that it's very easy to, because there's so much complexity and you can't possibly deal with all of it, to then swing the other way and say, this climate stuff's stupid. Like, let's just, you take an opposite position. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the dynamic you're talking about is, and it's a reality, is trust.
Yeah.
I mean, you're, obviously
Yeah,
an expert in your area. I'm an expert. I trust that you're doing good work. You trust that I do good work. And the way that's reinforced is through the institutions that we have, University of Colorado, Oxford University, the peer review system, and so on. And the minute we start seeing cracks in the foundation of those institutional processes, trust is, as you say, it can all go away. And this is why we take things seriously, like research misconduct and so on. And we can even talk about COVID and the Russian government skipping their phase 3 trials. If it doesn't work, that risks undercutting the system of drug development and so on. So I think it's absolutely essential to maintain trust. And one way to do that is to be brutally honest and upfront about uncertainties. Sometimes we discover things that don't match with a particular advocacy or media narrative. That's okay. And I think revealing uncertainties, mistakes, and so on actually helps to build trust. I know not everybody, agrees with that, but I think it's absolutely essential on a topic like climate, where we're going to need sustained action for many, many decades. So, whether we're up or down in the polls, for example, this year, the important thing is that baseline support over a long time.